So someone that struggled a lot when I was in college and someone that had a lot of failures when I was starting my engineering journey. I wish I had the resources we have nowadays. A lot of people are creating a lot of great content online, helping students. Hopefully this show is helping you in your career, finding ways that I can provide a lot of value to you. But the guest that we have here today is someone that is dedicating a podcast just for students, a podcast that is giving you the cheat code to finding your passion, finding your career, and getting through college successfully. In this episode, we talk everything from some of the biggest mistakes students make when they are in college and transition into the professional life, as well as how to use social media to leverage your brand, leverage your presence online, and find the right job for you whenever you're ready for it. Also, we talk about some of the things that we need to keep in mind when creating a LinkedIn profile, which is a social media platform, but I think is very powerful right now to find jobs, to find our mission, and honestly just grow the connections and grow our network online, which is really important. And something that I don't see a lot of students do is create a LinkedIn profile, add it to their resume, and we also touch about some of the things that you should be doing on social media to really increase your chances to be seen out there, and the importance of sharing things online for people to find you, and how the guest for today uses social media to reach millions of people every month. Welcome back to another episode of the Engineer Future Podcast. I'm your host, Luis Duque, and this week I talked to Justin. He is the founder of Declassified Media, a company that is really empowering students through really actionable content like the podcast, the Declassified College Podcast, as well as giving the students the tools they need to succeed in their careers. I really resonate with his mission. That's something that I try to do here at Engineering Our Future. And through this podcast and other resources on the website, I'm trying to give you a lot of great content, a lot of great things to help you in your careers and finding your passion, your mission online. The Declassified College Podcast is one of the top podcasts on iTunes, and he just shares bite-sized content. I think it's 10 to 15 minutes, really actionable. I was in a couple of episodes on the past. I will link those in the show notes so you can listen it. But it's a podcast that is really geared towards giving you the ultimate cheat code to succeed in college, which I think is a fantastic mission, because when I was a student, I fail a lot, and I talk about a little bit about it on this podcast. But there is so much things I wish I knew when I was in college. Some things like finance, things like finding a career, the importance of using social media to leverage your brand and leverage your career in general. I think it's something that is very important that we don't really hear about it in college. So needless to say, I was very happy to get Justin here on this episode. Again, go check out his podcast, go check out everything he's doing online, connect with him on LinkedIn. He's doing a lot of great things, and I really resonated with everything he's doing in his career and with his company, and helping students really find the passion and really find everything they need to succeed in their careers. So before we start today's episode, I just want to remind you to go check out the newsletter at luisfelipeduque.com/newsletter. I'm sharing a lot of content about the PE exam, which I recently took, as well as some of these more interesting topics, at least in my opinion, to find a more holistic approach to our careers, like finance, finding a career, and things that we don't really hear about too much online or in college. I'm just trying to put everything together, everything that I'm learning and really interested about, into a single place where you can just read it 5-10 minutes each week and get a lot of value. So if that's something that interests you, go to luisfelipeduque.com/newsletter to find more information about it. And without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation with Justin. Welcome to the Engineering Our Future Podcast, a podcast where I bring you relevant content from personal experience and guests to help young engineers, students, and international students succeed in their careers. So welcome back to another episode of the Engineering Our Future Podcast. Justin, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. How about you?
Good. Thanks for coming here. We've been chatting for a little while, and it's been great to hear your podcast as well and all the things you're doing for students. So I thought you'd be a great guest for this podcast. I try to help students in the early or late in their college, as well as the transition to the professional career. So I thought you were a great guest and someone that has a lot of experience on this topic. So do you want to just give us a little background of what you do and where you're at in your career right now?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first off, thank you for coming on numerous episodes of the Declassified College Podcast. So my name's Justin. and I am the founder of Declassified Media. And very similar to your mission, our mission is really to help students navigate college and into their career. So we talk about career stuff, we talk about personal finances, which I believe those were the episodes that you were featured on, as well as some other things like moving on to campus and things of that nature. And essentially, our goal is to create all this content and be able to give it away for free. And that's why we're a media company. Because my
Mhm.
whole thing is I don't think it's right to sort of gate a career knowledge that cuts off a lot of the students that really need this help. And the free resources that you have at school typically aren't the best. So we try to bring our students the best of the best. That's why we have people like you on, and be able to share the advice that a lot of these amazing people have around not just the US, but the world.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things I like to do with Engineering Future. Um, I came as an international student almost 10 years ago, and it was really hard for me to navigate being a new student in a new country with a different culture and finding the resources that I needed because life over here is completely different from Colombia, where I came from. So finding a way to navigate college, it was super important that to see kind of the role models in at that time that I could find or at least talk to and learn from them. So I think what you're doing is great. Just sharing knowledge about this. I know you have a lot of guests in your podcast. It's a really short and condensed podcast, which is great for students that maybe don't have a lot of time to listen to looking for podcasts. Really actionable and a lot of great content. So it was a pleasure being on your podcast, and I immediately thought about bringing you to the podcast because we connected on LinkedIn and see what you're doing. So let's just get right into the conversation. And one of the things that I wanted to start with is, and I'm sure you have a lot of experience with, is what do you see students doing? Maybe make mistakes when they're a student and when they're transitioning to a professional career.
Yeah, I think for me, the number one mistake that I see a lot of students do is they wait too long to get started. So what that means is you got like the junior or the senior that think that, oh, they've been working their job to pay through school, which again is very admirable, right? You have to pay the bills. But then they get to their junior slash senior year and they realize they don't really have a lot of actionable experience to whatever their major may be. So now they're in sort of this crunch, they're in this crisis mode, and there's nothing worse than being in this crisis mode, especially when it comes to trying to reach out to people and growing your network. Because I think the stat out there is like 60 or to 80% of all jobs are like filled through networking. And I'm sure you can talk to this as well. Of there's nothing worse than a student reaching out to you saying like, "Hey, Lewis, like, can I pick your brain?" Right? And like that just feels like they're just trying to take something from you. And when you get so many requests, as much as you would like to give everyone the time of day, like you have your own life, you have a job, you've got other things that you have to do, that you're not able to fulfill every single request that you get. So I think that's probably the number one problem is students wait until the last minute. And then because of that, they seem desperate of whether they're trying to reach out to recruiters, hiring managers, or just individuals within companies to potentially get that referral. You much rather start that off early and come at it from a place of I'm trying to learn more about this industry, and you'll get a much more receptive response than that person that basically is now like their own salesperson that you get like when you're walking down the mall and they're trying to sell you like perfume or cologne or whatever it may be.
Yeah, two really, really great insights there, and two things that I have lived through personally with this podcast and just being an introvert, coming to a different country, really doubting myself, failing a lot when I was in college. And the second one was with networking. The job that I have right now, it's all because of my network. Unfortunately, I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but unfortunately, the other company I was working for had to close right before COVID, maybe a couple months before COVID. Just because I knew the owner of the company I'm working for right now, I was able to get an offer and a job within 48 hours of start looking for a job, which is insane because it usually takes months, maybe like a really long time for people to find jobs in engineering with all the interview process, with all the recruiting that goes on. And I've lived this through in this company right now. We're currently recruiting a lot of engineers, and it just takes a lot of time to find the right candidate. So if you have a network, it's super important. And with LinkedIn, with social media, it's easier than ever to do those things and being involved in organizations and being involved with things outside of work. Even if you think the job you have right now, it's the only job you're going to have forever, it's probably not going to be the case. stats tell you that a lot of people change jobs, and a lot of people sometimes get bored, or sometimes just difficult situations as COVID happen, and you need to change pace and you need to find new opportunities. So I'm sure you have a lot of insight into this. You want to share a little bit of maybe your experience, and what you've seen other students struggle with when they're trying to find that first job, or when they maybe get laid off, or decide to change jobs. How is that transition, and how you've seen they have navigated that tough situation to find a new job?
Yeah, I think the difference that I've seen a lot of students, like the sort of the biggest difference between the quote unquote successful students, right? The ones that have the job opportunities, the ones that are interning at Fortune 500 companies, etc., versus the ones that may be struggling, is the ones that are successful are typically the most curious. And why? And the reason that I say they're the most curious is not because I'm trying to be this person that's like giving some basic advice or something like that, right? It's because when you're the person asking a question, right? You know how whenever someone's giving a talk, they always wait till the end and like, hey, does anyone have any questions? And maybe one person, maybe two people raise their hand, but typically everyone like doesn't raise their hand, even though there's probably a million questions going through everyone's mind. The person that raises their
Mhm.
hand and asks a question, even if it's a very basic question, now has a now has a connection point with that speaker. And then now they have a follow-up, right? They can then follow up and continue to build that network. Whereas if you're a random student in a crowd of 50 and you try to follow up with that speaker, let's say 15 other students follow up because that's what you're supposed to do, there's no differentiator between you and everyone else. And I would say to your point of like how you were able to land that job almost immediately after your other company closed down, it's because if you think about it, right, especially when you're a college student, every like a, if you're looking at the law of averages, you're average, right? Essentially you're average for the most part, which means there's many other people that can do the same exact thing that you can do in that position. Now, what's different is, can you work with that other person for 40, 60, 80 hours a week? And I think a lot of times, especially that first sort of interview stage, that's what they're looking for. And that's what people forget. And that's where the referral really comes into play. Because if you're applying to Google, I think they get 2 or 3 million applications every single year. How do you get through that noise? It's because you know someone on the inside, and that person on the inside is able to put their name on the line for you, essentially.
Yeah, that's super important too. And I always tell students and other people I talk to, the interview process is never about how much technical knowledge you have. If you look at the questions and if you look at kind of the process, they're trying to get to know you so they see if you're the right fit for their culture. And it's a lot easier to train that technical knowledge and find and figure out the concepts that go into specific industries. But if you're someone that is not willing to learn, someone that is not willing to adjust to the new company, that is uh, willing to change if there is something that needs to be changed, it's gonna be really hard for them to hire you, because it's just gonna be a burden for them to try to teach you the technical knowledge for that specific job, as well as train you to be someone that fits into the culture of that company. So the interview is never about how much you know. It's about who you are and how you fit into that company. And I think that's why it's so important to always have things outside of work. I like having this podcast. I like volunteering with different organizations. It just shows that I am someone that can work in teams, someone that can socialize, and someone that can has passions in my career, rather than someone that just sits behind the desk, does the job, goes home, and then comes back the next day. And for students, I think that's also super important, because, like you said, when you're a student, you're pretty much average. Like, there's very little things you can do to stand out. Those things, for me, in my case, was volunteering with engineering organizations when I was in school. Trying to find jobs as an international student was really hard to find these jobs, but I was able to tap into different things like volunteering and um, just learning things on my own that really stood up when I was applying to jobs. And it was not because of my grades. It was not because I had the most amazing internships when I was a student. It was because of all these activities kind of outside of work that made me someone that like stood up a little bit from the crowd, which I thought was super important. Something I know you're super big on, it's LinkedIn and social media. I think on TikTok, you guys are getting millions and millions of views every month. How you're using social media to um, be out there, like how you're using social media, how students can use social media to show what you're doing and not just share pictures of trips and just find things on social media, just actually make it work for you to find a job.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because like growing up, I remember not necessarily my parents, but like parents of like my friends or like teachers and professors and stuff saying, "Hey, you need to watch what you post on social media because someday someone's going to look at that," right? But like today, I think I have more friends that are landing jobs because of social media than ones that are getting let go. I think the more
Mhm.
people that are getting let go are actually older folks that are just like ranting on Facebook and stuff because they don't understand social media. um, the way that you use it correctly is, I think no one teaches you how to actually use LinkedIn. I think everyone knows, or most people know, to get on LinkedIn and they know, like, okay, this is how I set up a profile. But if you send a connection request, a personalized connection request, you're standing out. I would say maybe I get 10 to 20 requests every single week. Maybe one of them is a personalized invite. So just by you sending a personalized invite, you've now
Mhm.
stood out against the other 10 to 20 people that have tried to connect with me. That's how you build the initial step. The next part is where you're just trying to find ways to provide value. On social media, that becomes very easy to not seem transactional. You can like people's posts, you can comment on them, leaving something meaningful, rather than just something basic like, hey, good post or good job. Leave an actionable comment and you'll stand out from the rest. And people might say, "Oh, like you're just saying that just to say that." And the example that I bring up is one of my good friends. I won't mention his name because I don't know if he wants this information specifically out there, like back to his name. But this kid that I've known for, I want to say, 3 or 4 years now, he's been growing his Twitter personal brand for the past like 3 or 4 years. And it's not like he has a crazy following or anything. I think he's got maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 followers on Twitter, but they're all in the marketing space. He told me, like, Justin, I'm not necessarily liking my job right now. This is the middle of the pandemic. And he's like, I think I'm going to quit my job. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to quit in the middle of a pandemic? Like, everyone else is scrambling for a job and you're going to quit your job? And he goes, yeah, like, I'm confident that I can, I can find a job pretty quickly. So he quits his job. He sends out a tweet saying, like, "Hey, I'm looking for a new place to hang my hat for marketing. If you know anyone who's hiring, let me know." Within, I believe, a week, he had like 10 interviews set up, just because people who knew like how he worked wanted to work with him. And now he's in a job making double what he was making before. And he's at a point now where he's making, I would say, almost double what an entry level person would make. And since he dropped out of school, he would only now be about a half a year or a year out of college. So he's making double what he would be making most likely if he had gone the
Mhm.
traditional route and not worried about building his personal brand. That's the power of social media and just providing value and showing people that you can actually do things. And I think that's the big difference that a lot of like older generations didn't have, right? You had your resume and that was really about it. Maybe your family's reputation, but you had no way of broadcasting what you could actually do. Write an article about what you're researching. Create a LinkedIn post about the project that you're building on the side. You've got all these different mediums that you can showcase, like how amazing the work that you're actually doing, rather than just a few lines on your resume.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And I know a lot of people, and I'm always so surprised when I'm talking to students, help them craft the resume and fix it and give them feedback. I'll say maybe 2 out of 10 have the LinkedIn URL on the resume, which is a huge mistake because that's your resume only can give you so many things. You have a page max, maybe 2 pages if you have a lot of things going on, and that's it. It's really hard to tell your story through a piece of paper with written words. What about sharing your LinkedIn profile, or if you have a website where you share knowledge and insightful things that your employer can look at and get a better idea of what you do, who you are, and get a better picture of, is this the right person for this job? So I always encourage people to include the URL, or find me on LinkedIn or something on your resume referencing to your LinkedIn profile. Make sure your LinkedIn profile has obviously a profile picture, you cover relevant links, and uh, showing that you engage on the platform. I didn't really get into LinkedIn until I graduated from school, which was a huge mistake. But now I see the value on not only a social media platform, LinkedIn, but it's more like a professional network where you can network with basically anyone in the world. And I've created some amazing connections. We networked through LinkedIn. That's how you found me, and I found you when I went to your podcast, and now here. So showing people that I think LinkedIn is probably one of the most powerful ones in terms of finding a job. But obviously, I mean, TikTok, you have a lot of really short form content, a lot of, you can share basically anything. If you're in engineering, if you're in marketing, anything, you share really insightful content in there, and people are going to find you and recommend you if you are ever looking for a job. In your opinion, which platform should a student or maybe a young professional focus on? Or is there more than one they should be focusing on to really share their brand online?
I would say you probably want to focus on just one, whether that's LinkedIn, Twitter. I would say the probably the big three are LinkedIn, Twitter, and TikTok. In terms of finding your career, Instagram it might be a
Mhm.
little tough. Same with Facebook. I don't think there's a lot of like organic reach, so I don't think there's really that network effect that you could do. But I would say TikTok, if you're someone that can do anything visually, go down the TikTok route. Like I remember seeing someone that made like an Iron Man suit or something, like a fully functional Iron Man suit from scratch. And I'm pretty sure that person has a job now. Like if they wanted a job, they could easily get a job in any
Yeah.
engineering firm, right? Um, and like with Twitter, like my friend, like I was telling you, um, Twitter's probably a little bit more people who are good at writing, uh, rather than visual, like creating video. And then if you are sort of someone who likes to speak to people on a one-to-one basis, then maybe LinkedIn might be your preferred platform. So I think it really depends on who you are as a personal, like as a personality. But I think either platform that you choose has or can be effective. And the last sort of piece of advice I would have is don't necessarily worry about the views. You're probably not going to try to become an influencer or anything like that. It just matters about who is actually viewing your stuff. Like I said, my friend, he has like 1,500 followers on Twitter. He's not going to become the next like big Twitter star or something. But because those 1,500 people were specific in the space that he wanted them to be, it was extremely valuable to him. So you always have to be, or always want to be, as strategic as possible when it comes to building your network. When it comes to like, if you're trying to be focused on finding a job.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's really hard because all these platforms have like completely different audiences. Like the people that follow me on Instagram probably don't follow me on Twitter because it's just two different platforms with two different purposes. And obviously, LinkedIn, I really use it just to grow the professional network. I usually just connect with a lot of engineers or people are doing a lot of great things with business and things like that. I haven't really explored TikTok much. I feel like I'm already stretched out with like podcasts and everything. And what you said is really important is trying to focus on just one of them. And I've struggled with that in the past because you always see these people that maybe have a big team and they post everywhere and they do a great job posting everywhere. But for me, I think it's more important to, at least in my case, because I have very limited time. I work during the day. I record the podcast at night and edit it whenever I get a chance. For me, it's more important to focus on the podcast and maybe creating pieces of content from the podcast to share on LinkedIn or share on Instagram. And that way I am basically focusing all my energy on the podcast. And that's my main platform. Obviously, the podcast is also on YouTube. And having the other social media as something that I can just kind of share something where people that are following me already can see and learn something about what I'm doing on the podcast. But for me, the main thing for me is the podcast, and that's what I kind of when I focus all my energy on. Um, what is a great way that you have find people can leverage LinkedIn? I know you have a guide on your website, which I encourage people to go download. Um, how can we create a solid presence on LinkedIn, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the first part is fully building out your profile. It's very simple to build out your profile on LinkedIn, but you'd be very surprised at the people who don't even have a summary on their LinkedIn profile, let alone a picture, right? So making sure you have your picture, your background photo, it all sort of portrays either your personal brand or the industry that you want to break into, and then having keywords in your headline, and then your summary is you're really like your best place to shine, right? Because that's where you want to showcase your personality, who you are, and why you would add value to whatever team that you're looking to apply to. What people forget is that you can add links to your profile too, right? Whether that's things that you've been tagged in for research, whether that's a personal website that you've built, maybe a news article that you've been tagged in as well. Like there's a lot of different things that you can probably put into that. Use that as much as possible. Now, once you have your profile set up, what's most important, because most people can get the profile set up, they fail to engage and build up that network. So I would just set like a general rule for yourself of maybe every week you connect with 10 people, or every week you connect with 20 people, or something like that. If you can consistently do that for every single week, you've then sent out 500 connection requests that you probably would have never sent out before. And if you're strategic in terms of putting those connection requests towards whatever industry that you're trying to break into, and only targeting managers or directors, whoever it is, maybe 1 out of 10 connect back with you. But then that's now 50 people that are in the industry that you want to have conversations with. Like that's how much your network has now grown. Um, People fail to like the saying that I always come back to is we overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 year, and we underestimate what we can achieve in 10 years. And that whole thing of sending 10 requests every single week, that's something that you're playing for 10 years down the line. It might not work out for the first year, but 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the line, I'm sure when you're 500, 5,000 connections deep, one of those will pay off. And that's where it all comes to fruition.
Yeah, and I've done this podcast for just over a year now, and I've talked to CEOs of big companies, big organizations, and everything, and it's surprising to me the power of sharing something online, a blog, an insightful article, a podcast, video, whatever it is. People always watch, like they always see what you're doing, and if you show interest in what they're doing as well, you create that connection, that deeper connection. And I've sent, I don't know, hundreds of connection requests. Very rarely they reject them, as well as asking people on LinkedIn if they want to come to the podcast. Again, CEOs of big organizations, big companies, and they're always happy to share their knowledge, their insight. So I always encourage people to, at a very minimum, just have a website where they can share their thoughts in a blog form. At a very minimum, maybe if I ask, send CEOs or send some people that you admire a set of questions for them to answer and then post on the blog. People are always looking for opportunities to talk about themselves and share what they're doing. So it's always really, it's surprising to me the power of just sharing your knowledge and sharing something online that has an impact so many people on the other end. Even if I feel like I'm doing nothing with this podcast, at least I'm talking to people like you that are doing great things, talking with these engineers, talking with these CEOs that are giving me a lot of knowledge. And that may sound selfish, but at the same time, I want this podcast to be great. I want this podcast to reach out a lot of engineers. And just by having these conversations, I think every time I do a podcast, I learn something new. And every time I bring guests that are doing a lot of great things, it's always fun just to hear what they have to say. So just having something online, I think is just super important. Sharing valuable content, engaging in social media. I mean, social media is something that you engage and they engage. It's not like I'm just gonna post these and hopefully people start liking it, because that's not really how it works if you're not really engaging on the other end. I know your podcast is all about cheat codes and sharing really insightful and really short knowledge. Do you want to give us, in your opinion, what's the ultimate cheat code for students to find their first job after they graduate?
Yeah, I think kind of just playing off of your last point. Um, for me, I think I remember growing up. I'm like growing up, right? I'm 24 years old. I remember when I was like in college, everyone's always telling you like, "Hey, your network equals your net worth," right? And you always hear that it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And I think that's right to a certain extent. But what I think people fail to recognize with that saying is it's not necessarily about who you know. It's about who remembers you. And there's a big difference between that. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that you can probably list off of your head right now, but they might not have any idea who you are, right? And this is where your point of being remembered comes from that you were talking about a little bit earlier. Do you remember, like, have you ever had a friend who bought a car that you've never seen before, and then all of a sudden they buy it, and then now you see that car all over the place? That's basically you building up your personal brand and you being remembered. That's what you need to do in your career. Because if you, even if you've shaken someone's hand, even if you've jumped on one phone call with someone, that doesn't mean that they're going to think of you the next time they have an open internship or an open job. You need to be hosting a podcast like yourself, posting on LinkedIn, posting on Instagram, wherever that person follows you, so that every time that you put up a piece of content, they're seeing your face, they're seeing your work, they're seeing how good you are at what you do, so that when that opportunity does come, they think of who you are. That's probably why you got your job so quickly, right after your other company closed down, because you'd proven to that other person that you can do that job previously to them, and they immediately thought, "Oh, Lewis is right for this job." So that's sort of the analogy that I like to share to students is you want to become that new car that no one's ever heard of, but but ever since someone bought it, they see it all the time. That's what you're looking to become online.
Yeah, and I think there's just so much content online that I feel like a lot of times, even if I post something very similar two, three, four times, it takes a while for people to resonate with it. So I think it's also important to be consistent. And I mean, I've had podcast episodes that have done terrible, podcast episodes that have done amazing, and finding a place where you kind of share some of the same things, maybe over and over, for people to realize what you're trying to say or what you're trying to share. It's also very important. I see a lot of people posting maybe once a week, and after a couple of weeks, they don't get an engagement and they just kind of quit because nobody liked their post. But it just takes time, takes effort, and it just being authentic with what you're trying to share with other people. I'm not here trying to become the most extroverted engineer that exists. I'm just someone that hopefully I'm trying to show my personality, someone that came from another country, someone that has struggled with failure in the past, someone that has a lot of challenges kind of growing up and everything, showing my experience, and hopefully there are people that resonate with it and like what I'm doing. So I think that's also very important to keep in mind. Do you have anything else you want to share with us before we end this episode? I know you have a lot of great things with your podcast and everything, and on LinkedIn, people should go check out your profile. It's I think it's very well put together, and kind of some of the things you have talked about here. But just want to share a last few words of wisdom before we close out the episode.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for an excellent podcast episode. I love the questions that you asked, and I love the conversation that we had, and I got to learn a little bit more about you other than the snippets from our podcast. I would say the I guess the last thing that I want to say to the students or anyone who's listening to this show is to really just reiterate what I said at the beginning, which is you want to be curious. You want to be that person who is curious. And again, I can't emphasize this enough, because there's a difference between you listening to someone asking a question and you listening to that answer versus you asking that question and getting that answer to you. And I think a lot of people think, oh, someone asked a similar question, I already got the answer to it. I don't necessarily think that that's the truth. You got an answer, but you didn't get the answer that's right for you. And you, at those moments, you have to be a little bit selfish to get that right answer for you. And look, it is just the most beautiful follow up to be able to say, "Hey, I asked this question. Thank you so much for your answer. I'm going to go and execute on it now." And then that person's going to remember you for it. And then a month or two down the line, after you've executed on that person's piece of advice, come back to them and say like, "Hey, these are the results after I did what you told me." And they're like, "Oh my God, you actually did what I asked you to do." You'd be very surprised at how many people don't do what other people ask them to do in terms of like advice or anything like that. You'll be able to stand out, and you'll probably get that internship or job the next time around when you apply, because they'll remember who you are.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, it's very interesting because obviously I came across a lot of people on social media that just send me messages and everything, but it's always the people that kind of reach out saying thank you for talking about this one thing on a certain episode, or thank you for sharing that piece of content on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever it was. That's the people that kind of really sticks in my mind, and I have a like a database of all of those messages that I get kind of related to basically praising what I do online, because it's very valuable to hear that feedback, and it's really, I tend to remember those people more than someone that just kind of likes a post or really leaves a meaningless content, a meaningless comment on a post or something. Is the people that really take maybe 2-3 minutes to write something that is insightful, and that are really listening to what I have to say, and whenever they ask for feedback, and I give them the feedback, they follow it and kind of come back and saying that was really great what you said. I found a job, or I found a research assistantship or something because you told me to do this thing. And I've had a handful of people say those things. And again, I have a list and a database where I save basically all those comments. And I always like to come back whenever I post something online and nobody likes it, or post a podcast it does terrible, just kind of to pick myself up whenever I'm feeling down. But it's just great to see people really engaging and liking what I'm doing. And those are the people I tend to remember more, the people that really engage and everything. So I think that's a really, really great point. So before we close the episode, I asked this question to everyone here on the show, and that's, how can we continue engineering our future?
I think to continue engineering your future, something that I've started to do more, and something that maybe I wish I'd started to do before, is try to work things backwards. I think a lot of times we try to build ourselves up from the beginning, right? We think we're a marketing major, we think we're an engineering major, whatever it may be, and we try to figure it out that way. I think doing that, you're going to fail a lot. I think either way, you're going to fail. But I think if you want to lessen your failures, per se, you start from the end of, okay, maybe it's not what job you want to do, because I don't think anyone necessarily knows what job they want to do, because there are so many jobs out there. I mean, jobs that you probably don't even know exist, right? I think it's more of figuring out, okay, what type of lifestyle do you want to live? Do you actually want to be making six figure, like $250,000 a year? Do you actually want to have a family? Like, all these different factors are questions that you probably want to answer first, and then work your way backwards. Because there's been a lot of people that I've talked to, and myself included, were like, oh, I really want to work on Wall Street. But then, like, I look into the future and I'm like, oh, like, I want to have a family. And it's like, probably can't really have a family if you're working 80 to 100 hours a week on Wall Street. And then it's like, oh, I really care about my mental health. And then you start talking to some people on Wall Street, and they're like, yeah, it's really not that great in terms of work-life balance. And those are probably the more important question, rather than asking, oh, what major do you actually want to be? So work backward, like, figure out what your end goal is going to be, and then try to work backwards. And I guarantee you'll probably start to figure out what you not necessarily want to do, but now you have some sort of general path to aim towards, and start engineering that future of yours.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to start with why, and I think Simon Sinek has a really great book about it, and it's just really an important concept, because a lot of times I know as engineers, which are the majority of the people that listen to this podcast, we tend to overanalyze a lot of the things we're walking or working towards. And the more we start taking action, kind of some of the feedback you gave us at the beginning of the show is taking action early on, even if you feel like you're not ready. When I started this podcast, I started with my phone and wrapping it in a blanket so it didn't sound too bad. But at least I'm glad it started, because that led to all these conversations I'm having. I think this is going to be episode like 39 or 40 of the podcast, which is, it's amazing. I didn't expect to get this far into this, but I'm glad I started. So not overthinking, and really finding the purpose behind all the things you want to do in your career. I think it's super important. It's something that I try to share often, and share with people that really want to get somewhere and find purpose in their life. So Justin, thank you for coming to the podcast. Thank you for all the things you do online with your own podcast, social media, teaching students, helping students get through their college degrees into their careers. And where can people find you, find all these great resources you have, and connect with you?
No, thank you for this great episode, man. If you want to connect with me, the best place is probably going to be on LinkedIn. Just look up Justin Nguyen, Nguyen, and I might be like one of the first couple ones that pop up. I'm the guy with the backwards hat. That's probably how you can find me on LinkedIn. And then if you want to figure out or find any of our content online in terms of Declassified College, we're at Declassified College on all social media platforms. And then for our podcast, you just have to look up Declassified College on any podcasting platform that you listen on. So yeah, that's where you can find us.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link everything on the show notes at luisfelipeduque.com, and I'm sure people can find it and connect with you. Again, Justin, thank you so much for great conversation today, and it was great talking to you.
No, thank you. Have a good one.
So there you have it. That's the conversation with Justin today. Again, he shares a lot of great content, a lot of great actionable tips that I haven't really thought about before. And obviously, his perspective on being a student, being someone that is constantly trying to find new ways to help students through his podcast, through his company, and on social media, he's doing an amazing job of sharing all the great things and sharing really actionable content, which I think is super important nowadays and super important in a place, in an environment that is really crowded with a lot of things happening, a lot of people speaking. It's really hard to stand out, and he just really gives us a lot of great information on how to find and refine our network and find people that are really important. And I thought that example of his friend on Twitter, that we're in 1,500 followers. If you think about it, it's a lot of people, but for the starts of social media, it seems like it's nothing. And he was able to get a lot of job offers and a lot of people interested in what he's doing because he was putting himself out there, putting his brand out there, and connecting and networking with the people that really matter. So if there's one thing you take out from this episode is find your network and find the people that are really close to what you want to be doing. In my case, engineering, so that's mainly the people I connect with online. I try to expand a little bit just because the podcast is something that I really value and something that I want to bring as wide perspective as possible. But overall, my network is mainly engineers, mainly structural engineers, and finding that connection and finding that people is super important. So if there's one thing you get from this episode is find your network and work towards creating a solid network that you are engaged with. Like we talk, just sharing more of the things you're doing, as well engaging with the people that are sharing their thoughts and their knowledge online. I think that's very important. So thank you, Justin, for coming into the podcast. It was great talking to you. It's great to hear all the experience you have with students and teaching them and giving them all this actionable content. As always, thank you, Jack Winders, for the music. I'll talk to you in the next one. But for now, let's continue engineering our future.